Okay, so welcome to the first Morenu Shir. We're going to start the series, the first of the Morenu series, which deals with the topics that relate to Maaseh Shabbat. When I say Maaseh Shabbat, I'm using this as a blanket term that includes the things that a goy may not, the interaction that a Jew may have with a goy who will chalal Shabbat on his behalf, as we'll learn over the next in the first part of the series. The second part of the series will deal with issues that have to do with a Jew being a chalal Shabbat, breaking Shabbos, and therefore the question of, are you allowed to gain benefit from that? And the last part is going to be things that have to do with Shvitat Kelim, the question of whether a person's items and utensils can do the Chilul Shabbat on his behalf, and the parameters of that. So we start with the topic of a goy breaking Shabbat. And the first question is, before we go into the questions of whether you're allowed to gain benefit or not, the question of, am I allowed to instruct a goy to break Shabbat on my behalf? We start this from the Mishnah, in Perek Kaf Gimel Masechet Shabbat, brought to you over here at the beginning of the page. A person may not hire people to work for him on Shabbat. Why not? Why can't you hire someone to work for you on Shabbat? So, based on the rest of the Mishnah, this can be seen as in one of two contexts. Either it has to do with things that generally pertain to Mekach u'Memkar, and the concern that you might write down who you've hired, what the agreements have been, etc. Or things that have to do with ודבר, the prohibition to discuss on Shabbos things that have to do with work, things that are more appropriate to chol, that you're supposed to do during the week and not on Shabbat. The Mishnah continues, you can't ask a friend to hire workers for you either. Now, why can't you ask a friend to hire the workers for you? Presumably for the same reason. Now, why exactly? There are two ways of looking at this second part of the Mishnah. You can say, just as I am not allowed to hire workers on Shabbat, I can't ask Yaakov to hire workers for me on Shabbat because that's lifnei iver. I'm not allowed to ask other people to mechal Shabbat, just as I may not mechal Shabbat. And that's a lifnei iver problem, meaning I'm not really breaking Shabbat by asking him to do it, but I'm not allowed to ask someone to break Shabbat because lifnei iver, you're not allowed to ask people to do things that are against the Torah. That's one way of looking at the second half of the second sentence. Another way of looking at it is that if we have this interaction, the exact same problems that we have in the first part will apply to the second part as well. Just as if I'm going to discuss hiring on Shabbat, so I might write things down. Just as I discuss hiring, I might write things down, or I'm hiring people for Shabbat, that's a problem with ודבר. So too, if I ask someone else to hire for me, I'm putting myself into the same problem. Right? The same issue presumably applies, the same two issues we had in the first part of the Mishnah, the Chorah should apply to the second part. Right? If I'm discussing hiring people, if I'm telling Dad, go hire people for me, so we're discussing hiring, I might write down what the terms that I'm willing to accept are, for example. Or if we say ודבר, that you're just not allowed to discuss these things, we're not allowed to discuss these things even if it's 2 steps away, right? Presumably. Now, the Gemara asks this question. There are actually 2 different versions of the Gemara, 2 versions of the Gemara. The first one of the Gemara, does the Gemara say pshita or not? Now, why is that interesting? Because the Gemara doesn't say pshita, so the Gemara is just asking an innocent question. Why does the Mishnah bother saying both? Not because each of them is obvious, but because if one is obvious, the other is too. Presumably the Gemara knows what the prohibition the Mishnah is referring to is. That's my point. The Gemara says Pshita. It seems to me that the Gemara is saying, "Hey, we know what the prohibition is. What is it? As I've said, it's not so clear, right? Does it have more to do with the ודבר or more to do with the chashash that you might write things down? That's the Gemara's question. The Gemara says, why mention that you can't tell a friend either? Rav Papa said, when we say friend, we mean a goy. Chaver nochli. We're talking about asking a goy. Okay, so what? Why should that make a difference? Presumably, Rav Papa is saying, not only am I not allowed to hire people, I'm also not allowed to have a goy hire on my behalf. And then this Mishnah is the chidush of this Mishnah. Why did the Mishnah add these few words? Why did the Mishnah add lo ma'adam chavro liskol palim? To tell us not only may you not hire people, so too you're not allowed to ask a goy to do things on your behalf on Shabbat in general. On this, Rav Ashi asks, we know that already. Amiral nochli shvut. Now, why is amiral nochli shvut? What does that mean? Amiral nochli shvut. Presumably, Rav Ashi is saying we know there's such a prohibition, and it doesn't stem from this Mishnah. If we look at Rashi, Rashi explains. If you look at in English, it's the top of the next page. Rashi writes. The second line in Rashi, meaning, I don't need this Mishnah to teach me that I'm not allowed to ask a goy to hire someone on my behalf. We have another Mishnah that tells me I'm not allowed to tell a goy to do things for me on Shabbat. So we have the same question, why bother adding a few more words to this Mishnah? You may ask yourself, why am I working so hard at this Gemara? I want to go into Rav Ashi, what Rav Ashi says, and we'll see why. But there's something a bit slightly strange about what's going on in the Gemara here. Again, the Mishnah says I'm not allowed to hire, I'm also not allowed to ask someone else to hire on my behalf. Rav Papa says, who is this friend of mine I'm allowed to ask, to request this action from? A goy. Rav Ashi says, yeah, we know that already. Why did the Mishnah need to add these words? And then Rav Ashi goes on to say, really, it wants to teach us a certain kula. Because I may not hire workers on Shabbat. I'm also not allowed to ask someone else to hire workers for me on Shabbat, but I am allowed to hint to him, hey, maybe after Shabbat we'll get together and we'll do something, right? Maybe we'll get together after Shabbat and then we'll do what we do. That what we do happens to be hire people to renovate my house. But that's okay, right? That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, meaning, you can't hire someone, but you can say to someone, maybe we'll meet after Shabbos. Why should we meet after Shabbos? Because I have some work to do. You're not allowed to say that part. I have some work for you to do. You're allowed to say, maybe you want to come over after Shabbos. That is okay. This is all within the parameters of the Easter that the Gemara brings on, that the Gemara expresses later on, at the end of this Gemara, which is down on the page. Meaning the whole problem of hiring someone on Shabbat is a problem of ודבר.
So now we don't speak about the goy anymore.
Right. Rav Ashi rejected the explanation that said we're referring to a goy. Right? And says we're talking about a regular Jew. And the chidush in the Mishnah that says you can't request from a friend is within the parameters. The Mishnah is trying to define the parameters of ודבר. So again, Rav Papa says we're talking about a goy. Rav Ashi says no, we know that already. That's not a good enough reason for the Mishnah to repeat the words and to add on to the Mishnah. So why does the Mishnah add? To tell us, if the Mishnah says first, I'm not allowed to hire, I'm also not allowed to tell a friend to hire for me, we say, okay, but there's something that falls between the cracks, which is hinting to someone, why don't you come around? That is okay. So the Mishnah adds another part to the Mishnah to hint at that leniency. Now, I want to go back to Rav Ashi's rejection of what Rav Papa said. Rav Papa said, we're talking about a guy, and Rav Ashi said, yeah, we know that already. What do we know? That you're not allowed to hire, that you're not allowed to ask, to request the Melacha be done by a guy. Right? Why not? So, if we want to say, tornado why can't we? Why am I not allowed to request the Melacha be done by a guy? The question is, what did Rav Ashi mean when he said Amira l'nochri shvut? There are two ways. Rav Ashi says, Matkiv Rav Ashi, Amira l'nochri shvut. What does Rav Ashi mean when he says this? There are one of two ways of reading what Rav Ashi says. One is, the prohibition in the Mishnah refers to ודבר, right? How do I know Rav Ashi himself thinks that's the prohibition in the Mishnah? Because later on, when he says, no, the Mishnah is referring to Rabbi Yosef ben Korcha, Rav Ashi quotes ודבר. So we know Rav Ashi agrees that the Mishnah is really talking about the prohibition of ודבר, right? As far as Rav Ashi is concerned, when it says, Lo yiskel adam parim b'Shabbat, why not? Because of ודבר. How do I know that? Because then when Rav Ashi continues and says the second part of the Mishnah is giving the leniency in what din? In the din of ודבר. So that tells me Rav Ashi agrees that the Mishnah, the topic of the Mishnah is ודבר. Right? Now, so what is the prohibition Rav Papa is referring to when he says chaver nochri? There are one of two ways of looking at that, right? One option is to say he agrees. There's no argument that it's ודבר. And when Rav Ashi says Amira l'nochri shvut, he means we know that's part of ודבר. We have a different mission that tells me it's part of ודבר. Right? That's one way of reading Rav Ashi. Again, Rav Ashi rejects what Rav Papa says. He says Amira l'nochri shvut. Hold on, is Rav Papa talking about the same prohibition as Rav Ashi, or the other way around? Rav Ashi says, no, Amira l'nochri shvut, and therefore Rav Papa's saying this Mishnah that talks about the Rav Papa, when Rav Papa says this is the prohibition telling a guy to do something on my behalf on Shabbat. Is it the same prohibition or not? Right? Rav Ashi definitely thinks it's ודבר. Rav Papa, it's not so clear. So the question is, how do you read Rav Ashi? Right? If you understand that Rav Ashi is saying, yeah, we know that already, you're right, it is ודבר. And we all agree there's ודבר. There's no argument about that. So the prohibition of asking a guy to do a Melacha on Shabbos that we're referring to in this Mishnah is the Yisur ודבר, of referring to Melacha that's prohibited on Shabbat. Right? But it doesn't sound like that's what Rav Ashi is saying. Right? Because Rav Ashi says, Amira l'nochri shvut, meaning it sounds like there's a different prohibition that applies to goyim. I don't need that prohibition, there's another one. And then there's a question, what is that other one? So we're going to get to that in a moment. When we reach Unit 33, we're going to go more deeply into ודבר, which is a whole world unto itself. But it seems that it's very hard to argue that there's no problem with ודבר if I'm not allowed to discuss business in certain parameters that we'll learn then. But I'm not allowed to discuss the active aspect of business on Shabbat with anyone. There shouldn't be any reason that discussing with the goy should be any different. So presumably it would be hard to argue that there isn't a prohibition of ודבר when we're talking to a goy about working on Shabbat. But just from Rav Ashi's rejection, it seems that there's another prohibition, not only that one. Right? Since he said, no, there's another, right? There's also a shvut, there's a different prohibition that is not the one we're referring to in the Mishnah. So that's why I want to emphasize that Rav Ashi's rejection of what Rav Papa said could be read in two ways. It could be read, we know that. The Mishnah doesn't need to add any more to tell me that, because there's a whole other Mishnah that talks about it, as Rashi says. Right? Or you can say, no, it's a different prohibition. Why are you mixing up that one into here? And the prohibition of asking a guy to do Melacha for me on Shabbos is a different one, and possibly even one that's more problematic. Now, so that's one point of proof that l'chora that proves that you have to explain that there's another prohibition here. So I just want to summarize the two ways you can read this Gemara. Rav Papa says we're talking about a goy, and Rav Ashi says no. What? No. Option one. You're right. We're talking about the vodvar, and you're right that talking to a goy is prohibited as well. But that's the next Mishnah. It's not this Mishnah. The Gemara, the Mishnah added another sentence to tell me something else, to teach me about that hirur, that hinting is okay even despite ודבר. We're going to get back to hinting later on in the shir. That's one way of reading it. The other way of reading it is saying there's a totally different isur, there's a totally different prohibition that applies to goyim. Then we're going to have to find what is that other prohibition. This Mishnah definitely refers to ודבר. Therefore, what you said, Rav Papa, about a goy, that's a different story altogether. It's true that the vodvar should apply to a goy, but there's another prohibition that we're going to have to look for. Another proof, another raya, that there must be another aspect to the prohibition of requesting a melacha from a goy, comes up on page 3 in the English pages. Towards the end of the page in the Mishnah. The Mishnah there refers to a person who's on his way to the city, and he's carrying, as people do, he has a few donkeys. He has his case, he has his backpack, he has his case, he has his wallet, he has all those things. He's walking with a goy, and Shabbos is coming. So what does he do? There's a problem, because he can't carry his wallet, he can't carry his wallet, he can't carry anything when you're out of the tchum, right? You can't carry on Shabbat. So what do you do? So the Mishnah says, I'll read the Mishnah briefly, you're carrying your wallet, you say, I don't want this wallet to get stolen, so you give it to a goy. The Gemara says, so the Gemara tells us there's a special leniency. You shouldn't be allowed to give a goy your wallet, or your pack, or whatever it is. There's a special leniency. Leniency in what sense? What are we being lenient about? Yeah. When are we talking about? At what point of the day do you give the goy your pack or your wallet? Presumably that has to happen before Shabbat starts. Right? We're not talking about you reached Shabbat, you started walking, it's still Shabbat, and you say, oh, hold on, I have to give the guy the wallet. Right? You have to hand it to him before Ben Hashmashat. You have to we'll learn in Unit 27 that there's a chiyuv to add on to Shabbat. You have to start a few minutes before Shkia. So we're talking about before Shabbat. Before Shabbat, there's a prohibition to give the goy work that will go into Shabbat on your behalf. That's what this Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah says, in this specific case, there's a leniency. Chazal asks why, and the answer is because we know the other option, the person is going to do Mechel Shabbat. We can't expect people to just leave their pack in the middle of the desert and hope for the best. It's not going to happen. So we say, we have a special leniency, give it to the guy, it's fine. But it's a special leniency. What is the prohibition? It can't be ודבר. ודבר can only be relevant on Shabbat itself. Because ודבר is a prohibition to refer to things, to discuss things that are also on Shabbos itself. So from this Mishnah also we see that there must be another prohibition that applies to Shabbat. There's another Gemara, very interesting Gemara. Another Gemara in Bava Metzia Daf Tzadi comes up earlier on the page. Lo tachsom shor b'disho. You're not allowed to muzzle an ox while it's threshing. I think some people understand that even more easily in Hebrew than the English, because most of us don't thresh often. Right? The Gemara asks, am I allowed to tell a goy, block my ox and thresh with it? And the Gemara compares it to Amira L'Nuchli Shavut. Now, what are we talking about exactly? Is there any Kedusha in the ox? Or in the threshing? Or presumably, ודבר refers to the Kedusha of Shabbos. Shabbos is a holy day that has to have only a certain holy context, and shouldn't include context that is not part of that holiness. Right? So that's why you're not allowed to deal with your business. You have to put your business aside and say, now it's Shabbos. So you're also not allowed to discuss business. And the parameters will in Shir 33. But here, when they tell the guy, could you do this threshing for me? Block the ox and do the threshing on my behalf. Is there a certain kedusha in the ox, or the guy, or the threshing? Where is the ודבר here? It doesn't seem to work. It doesn't fit. Right? Mimela, we're going to have to say that there's another prohibition, and for that, we're going to move into the next shir.